the final shuttle mission currently underway, the International Space Station and private space stations, such as Bigelow's expandable modules, will need both transportation and a diverse customer base. Who will buy time and space aboard orbital platforms? How do we promote the development of such a market? What capabilities already exist and how can we best utilize them? And once the market has been established, how will we best utilize payload space and launch capability? Today's moderator will be Ken Davidian, who is the Director of Research at the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Don't clap. Hello, everybody. I apologize for the acoustic attack before. I'll try to keep it down. I tend to speak very quickly, so I'll try to speak very slowly as well. Hi, my name is Ken Davidian. I work for the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and I'm holding up a SEDS pamphlet right now, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. The reason I'm doing that is they're having a conference coming up at the end of October in Boulder, Colorado. But right before that conference, 2 days prior to it, we're going to be holding a workshop for whoever wants to come, really, but again, focusing on the attendees. We're going to be doing something which is an activity which pertains to the topic of this panel. We're going to be looking at, it's called a demand roadmap for commercial space, and part of what this panel is where is the demand going to come from, and is it possible to see into the future and roadmap it even? And that's going to be part of the activities that we do at the panel. The other part is we're going to be doing an industry structural analysis based on the work of Michael Porter on some, if not all, of the commercial space segments. So I wanted to plug the SED Space Vision Conference again. The workshop will be 26, 27, I believe, of October, and then 28, 29, 30 is the SEDS conference. So come one, come all to beautiful Boulder, Colorado. It is absolutely a great place to be. So anyways, today we are going to be talking about customer-based development for orbital science platforms. And this is going to be a shock for some of you. Expected to see Doug Comstock up here as the moderator. He was not able to come. He actually sent a panelist, Diana Hoyt, who's on the panel here, and she'll introduce herself a little bit more in a little bit. We also have James Downey, or Patton Downey, sometimes he goes by. We love the name Patton. We also have Jeff Smith down there at the other end of the corner. I should have mentioned, Diana's from NASA headquarters. Patton / James is from NASA Marshall. We've got Jeff down there from NASA Ames, and then we have Dennis Stone from NASA Johnson. You saw him before moderating the panel prior to this one, immediately prior to this one, or two in front of this one, I guess. I forget, yeah, last time. And then, just because we're wild and crazy, we have somebody not from NASA on the panel, and that's Erica Wagner. So she's going to explain her presence and let us know what she's doing here when we get around to her. So I think I'm going to stop talking here, and I'm going to let each of the panelists say, hi, my name is, tell us a little bit about themselves, and then we'll jump right into the exciting discussion that's to follow. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Patton Downey. I'm from Marshall Space Flight Center. As mentioned earlier, if you're looking for me in the book, you probably should look under James. I'm working right now as the technical manager for the Microgravity Materials Research Program at Marshall Space Flight Center. It's sort of back from the dead. Like many programs involving space station, it was more or less zeroed out a few years back, and as political winds change, as often the case, there was a decision. It was kind of silly to build that space station, not do any materials research on it, at least for the U.S. program. And so we're getting a little funding again, and we're back in business again, and in certain ways, beating the bushes looking for fellow advocates for the space station research program, commercial partners that might be interested, and what kind of teaming arrangements we can do out there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, James / Patton. Okay, next we're going to talk to Diana Hoyt.
I'm Diana Hoyt. I work in the office of the Chief Technologist in the Innovative Partnership Office at NASA headquarters. My background is a little bit mixed. I came from Congress, from the Hill, where when Deke Slayton came to see us in 1991, and 1981, and said, we can't get a license to launch, and we want to, our company, Space Services Incorporated, really wants to launch rockets off of Matagorda Island, and it's taking us 8 months and nobody can help us. And so we put together HR 3942, which is the Commercial Space Launch Act, which was introduced by my boss, Dana Kaka, and it is amended today and continues to be law. And it should have been a paradigm-changing piece of legislation, but the landscape wasn't ready for the legislation. And I would contend now that the landscape really is ready for commercial space, and it really is ready for things called customers. And we'll talk a little bit later about what it means to be a customer. I worked for Mike Griffin, who told me in SEI 1, Diana, I've told you once, I've told you 500 times, I don't need to build a rocket, I don't need to build a satellite, I don't need to launch it, and then I don't need to bring back data to have a minerals map of the moon. All I need to do is buy one, and I don't care where it comes from. He got it.
Nice, nice.
Over to you, Erica.
Let's move on to Erica Wagner.
There we go. So my name is Erica Wagner. I'm the Senior Director for Exploration Prizes at the X Prize Foundation. Do work of our new prize development in space and deep sea. My background, though, is in space life sciences, and I do quite a bit of work with the Suborbital Applications Researchers Group, thinking about suborbital as a bridge to orbital and how we can use these vehicles in pursuit of not just tourism, but also academic research, corporate industrial research, and educational opportunities. Thinking as well about not just human platforms, but how do we think free flyers and other vehicles may fit into this bigger picture. So I'm here to push buttons that NASA people can't push.
Perfect, perfect. That's
Sometimes you need to push
That'll put-
NASA's buttons.
That'll
Right.
put people in seats, you know, for this panel. Good. And now we have Dennis Stone.
I'm Dennis Stone with the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, or COTS effort, managed out of NASA Johnson. 25 years at NASA, always thinking, there's another way we can pursue space. So I'm really proud to be able to be part of that on the inside, helping to push the commercial space transportation market. And if we have introductory slides, do you want them now or later?
Do you have them? Let's put them up.
Or maybe
Is this?
you're doing slides too? I don't,
Okay. Is this? Are these your introductory slides with the Earth on it and stuff?
okay.
Can you do it from there? You want to do it from here? I'll sit next to Erica. I don't know.
How do you do this? Next. Just read this. I wish for you guys, I'll read the slide. It says, oh, microgravity's been around for a long time. Didn't we try this before? Or my favorite, if they're really customers, they'd call us. Yeah, okay, yeah, right. There's no market because NASA cut the funding, right? Have you heard that? I have. Why talk about it now? Has anything changed? Okay, the point is usually folks, are skeptical, particularly people in the space business. When I talk about microgravity, they say, okay, oh yeah, we did that. Now let's do something else. And I go, no, pay attention. The next chart, please. So what has changed? What is different now? Now there is a robust spectrum of ways to get gravity removed. You can go from a drop tower of 2 seconds, a suborbital, to a parabolic plane of 30 seconds. A suborbital is 3 minutes and up. Sounding rockets, all the way up to the space station, Dragon Lab, Bigelow for the long durations, and even at this little thing that sits down here, it sits on your desk. It's called a rotating wall vessel. It simulates microgravity, and it's a good place to start on some of these things. So this didn't exist 30 years ago. Space station wasn't even there. So look, the picture has changed. So now we have a robust ability to supply microgravity at different points of price, risk, schedule, and duration. So that's new. The next chart. So who cares? Well, if you go to people and say, hey, do you want to fly in space? They go, no thanks. But what I've learned, and scientists smarter than me have told me how to talk, if you go to researchers and say, I can remove your gravity, you'll have no convection, shear forces, hydrostatic pressure, gravity-driven diffusion, blah, blah, blah. And they go, no way, And furthermore, now you can get it in a number of different ways and durations. They say nobody's telling us this. So what have we learned over years and years of experimentation? particularly since the human genome has been sequenced, we're finding some amazing things about gene expression in space. For example, there's been a campaign of flying salmonella. Why? Well, it actually becomes more virulent. It's a better killer. Oh, that's great, NASA. Why'd you do that? Well, because it turned out that the responsible gene upexpressed, so it identified itself. It became a target, so back on the ground, scientists can develop vaccines and treatments. So the next killer microbe is in the pipeline. We'll be flying more and more and more. So you fly in space, you learn something through gene expression changes that can save lives and make money on Earth. Likewise, the same characteristic of microgravity-induced changes can be used to create, at least understand how to create new cultivars for plants to grow in climactic zones that they currently can't grow in. For example, right now we're working with Ditropha, which is an oil seed. You know, it produces jet fuel, and we're trying to figure out whether it can be adapted to grow in currently non-arable, like desert-like climate. So you can do food production and so on. And you go around this circle, and I won't spend a lot of time, there are smarter folks here than I am about this, but growing three-dimensional tissues for pharmaceutical testing. We've learned recently that space is useful in nanotech, where in the design of their nanotech systems, gravity and these forces in the center here are a big problem. And you can fly in space, test your system, and use it back on Earth. You know, some of the things I know you guys work on at Marshall in terms of combustion and material science and so on have been known for a long time. And of course, the protein crystals. Some of these are new applications, and some of these have been around a while. So finally, so what? The challenge is you've got some supply, you've got some at least potential demand. How do you build a market? How do you bridge the gap? And again, what we're finding is folks don't know. These potential applications, except the ones that work closely with NASA, I'm talking about the big biotech industry out there, thousands and thousands of researchers, they're clueless because they just haven't heard it. They haven't tried it. And so what are the right mix of methods? And I don't have the answer. This is why this panel is important. Your opinions are important. I'd love to hear from you how you think NASA can play a role in promoting all these applications across all platforms in a very holistic way. And we've tried many of these. There's platform-specific marketing. There have been research partnership centers, there have been prizes and so on. So there's no one right answer, but what's a good mix of things? So these are some of the things I want to learn today from the panel and from all of you, both today and afterward. Thanks.
And now Jeff.
All right, well, I have, like all NASA, good NASA people, I have PowerPoint charts too. So my name's Jeff Smith. I'm the branch chief for our Space Biosciences Research branch here at NASA Ames. And we're a branch, much like an academic department of about 13 scientists and investigators. And if you want to know about customers, and I think I know about customers because our branch, our division works with these kinds of customers all the time. They're the ones that we are most familiar with working with are the academic customers, the scientists who come from universities and are probably government funded, flying their research in space. But when it comes to biology and biotechnology, our division knows how to get your idea flown in space successfully. And I think that's something that Dennis was just mentioning. The scientist on Earth who's doing something else commercially is going to ask, well, I don't want to fly something in space, but if you can remove gravity, now I got something, and we know how to do that here at Ames. So we've got 3 branches: life support, space biology, that's everything from cell biology up to human biology, and then the space flight systems. Next slide. And if you want to know about what we're doing and the customers we're serving, well, we're doing it right now, all the time. STS-135 just landed last week. We had 7 payloads aboard, and it might be the last time the shuttle touched down, but this is really a great time for commercial opportunities and new customers to be developed in this area in particular. Next, please. On board, we had 7 experiments, but I want to touch on a couple of them because, yes, they might have been academic, a lot of them, but The one on the upper left was an animal research project that was looking at pharmaceuticals for looking at bone loss in space and how to combat the bone loss in space that astronauts are experiencing, but that also are experienced here on Earth. And that the company that was working with NASA on that was Amgen Incorporated, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the United States. And if there's anything we can learn in space about bone loss, it'll help our astronauts, of course, but it's also going to be influential to our understanding of how to combat bone loss here on Earth. And that, osteoporosis alone is a multi-billion-dollar annual industry. And so there's a lot of really interesting things that the commercial sector can use the space environment to do, where they can advance their state of knowledge faster or better by using space when they might not be able to do it the same here on Earth. And that's an example that just happened. So it is possible, it is happening, just not at a breakneck pace or at the level that we might like it to. Next, please. There is a website that a small working group has put together called the Space Commercial Laboratories Working Group. You can go and Google that, and it's probably too small for you to read, but things like crystal growth and manipulating the convection and conductive forces and things like that in space are among the most important reasons why we think the commercial sector and the academic sector will want to utilize space. Next. What's happened? Over the course of just the shuttle era, there have been over 300 successful space flight experiments like this. There have been, I think it says 57 out of the 135 shuttle flights had space biology and biotechnology experiments aboard them. And there are several hundred journal publications on this. So there's a lot out there that's going on, and I think that commercial groups are going to get increasingly more involved in this. We can help. Last slide. The last one is, at Ames we have a division. We have ground-based capabilities, researchers who can help, and space flight capabilities. So I think, if you're a customer, a potential customer, and you want to understand how do I remove gravity and get the answer to my question or develop the technology that I want, I think NASA Ames has a lot of expertise, and we want to develop partnerships to be able to do that with you. So thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now, of course, this part of the show is where you guys start typing in your questions into the iPads and into your Blackberries and send it over to these guys somewhere over here, and then we get a piece of paper with your questions on them. But until then, I'm going to ask a couple questions. I'm going to start with Jeff and say, Jeff, are the scientists customers or are they users?
All right. Well, I'm a scientist myself, so I don't know the definition.
Okay.
Anybody who wants to fly something in space that comes to me and I help them do it, to me.
Then let me give you an example from my childhood. My dad had a store downtown Cleveland, and every day on Saturdays and during the summers, I would go work with him. And when I was like 8 years old, they'd say, Ken, it's getting around lunchtime. Here's $10. Go to the spaghetti house, get lunch, and bring it back. Am I the customer, or is my dad the customer of the spaghetti house? Who's paying for it?
Who is paying for it? And a lot of times these days, the government is the original financier of the work.
Okay, so that's what I'm asking. The scientist is the user. They're more than a courier service that I was. They're more, they're the talent, obviously, and NASA's the sponsor.
So,
yes, go ahead.
Flaw in your analogy.
Perfect.
All right. If in fact you go to the store or you go to the restaurant and you buy for your dad,
right.
All right, in terms of a God's eye view, which you don't have and no one has, your dad's the customer. He pays.
Right.
However, to the supplier, you are the customer. You little boy are the customer. So the question is, from the supplier's point of view, does it matter who pays?
Jeff?
Oh, I'll say today.
Or what we call you?
The image of biotech and space biology that I just painted is one which is 99.9% probably paid for by a government, not by a commercial entity. How do we get from there to one that in the near future is paid 80% by the government, then 60, then 40, maybe even less? That's what we're shooting for. How do we get from here to there? The government is going to play a very significant role in priming that pump at the early stages to get the commercial base up to the point where they can pay more and more until they're paying their full way.
And that's the point of the panel, is how do you develop that base?
So I think there's an interesting point here that I'm not that old, but I have been watching literally for decades people saying, NASA, the biotechnology industry is going to come to you begging for flights. And there's a huge market to be captured in biotech. And we haven't seen it. We see the occasional flight, but most of these are really small investments by very large companies. And one of the questions I have is, where does NewSpace change this equation? And it does it in a number of really fundamental ways. We are shortening the timelines to flight. So a company who wants to have this as part of their R&D pipeline doesn't need to lengthen their R&D pipeline by a year or 2 years waiting for a flight. We can start to see these coming in faster. We're starting to see the price come down, and that's certainly valuable. We're starting to see these customers being the primary customer of a flight. So you're not waiting for the astronauts to disembark and do all of their other things before you can get your samples. You're not waiting for the vehicle to reach orbit and all of NASA's objectives to be reached before the corporate objectives can be reached. But we can start to put other customers first. And I think these things may come around to giving us a new perspective on the industry. Whether it has them beating down your doorstep, I'm not quite sure.
I'd just ask something of the audience. Tell me, how many of you are customers for either suborbital, orbital, or exorbital flight?
Show of hands, please.
I want to see. Put your hands up. Nobody.
I see like 4 hands.
4, okay. I can't see for the bright lights. How many of you would like to be customers for any part of the flight along the continuum?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh,
Still not very many.
Many more, but a factor of 5 more.
So I'm starting to wonder if this is new space or middle-aged space. Okay. How many of you would like to be suppliers for some part of the architecture? Rockets, satellites, switches, toilets?
30.
30. And then for the rest of you, why are you here? No, I'm serious. Are you here because it's a movement and we care and it's the future and we want to support it? Are you here to give us information, to exchange information, and to try to discuss how do we get from a nascent, almost just born idea of the future to a robust world where space is a place, not something strange and scary? So I would say that one of the things we could think about in the definition of customer is not simply our usual suspects, like let's take the microgravity people, the biology people, the material science people. We've done it before, we know how to do it. And the private sector will supply the infrastructure, and maybe they can recruit some private sector companies, and we'll gradually stand back, and the world will be a better place. Maybe what we need to think about is the entire architecture from the ground to past LEO, and maybe we need to think about what are the uses of this peculiar place where you can remove gravity that we don't know about yet. And if we don't know about them, how do we go about finding them? Because I think if we round up the usual suspects, we will get the usual paradigm. We may have less government involvement, but we'll have the same customers and we'll do the same old stuff in space.
I'm afraid to do it, but Paul?
To quote Mr. Miller from the last quote, your discussion, in my mind, is presupposing that your discussion, in my mind, is presupposing that you can pick the winners. I think that's a false assumption. I think the focus ought to be on greasing the skids by providing a known market to the suppliers and a known capability to the potential customers. So say, hey, we're launching 3U satellites. We'll fill them with sand, but if you don't want them full of sand, highest bidder gets this payload and we pay for the payload. You don't know what the payload's going to be. You don't know what the customer's going to be. I mean, maybe somebody's going to send yeast cells and sell space beer.
No, that's a good point. I mean, basically, would a government agency, is it a good use of taxpayers' dollars to take that chance? I mean, some people would argue with that. Joe, okay, come on.
The biotech industry has an architecture of its own, and one of the ingredients in it is something called a CRO, a Contract Research Organization. It's kind of like a NASA for hire, but it's a private entity. And they have different specialties. Some just do epidemiological studies, some own a fancy piece of equipment, some do a wide variety of things. I think that if you could find a company that's already viable as a known CRO in the biotech industry and talk them into being the terrestrial half of a service provider, Paul Breed or somebody else, and you do not want an aerospace company. And the reason is you don't want them to be ITAR bound. You want them to be a biotech company that can deal with any nationality, and they turn it over to the rocket service provider. Okay? I think that's the architecture you need. And there's a finite number, half a dozen organizations in the country. You need to seduce one of them into providing the service.
Well, that brings up a good point of going to non-traditional customers, non-consumers, somehow in the value chain. Diana, do you have anything to say on that?
I have lots to say on that.
Keep it short, but start.
Okay, all right. Non-traditional customers are people who don't know that they're customers or ever will be customers and have no interest in being customers. And let me give you, this is an apocryphal example, okay, so it's probably not true. But the story goes, sorry, but there is truth in the example. It may not be true, though. The story goes that Henry Ford was thinking about how to make cars sort of faster, all right? And he wasn't really sure how to do this, but clearly there was some reason to do it. And one day he went over to a slaughterhouse meatpacking plant. And he looked, and by golly, cows went in and hamburger came out the other end, okay? And he thought, well, what if I could do the same thing with cars? Parts go in and cars come out the other end, all right? Now, nobody would ever think that benchmarking a meat slaughterhouse packaging plant would have anything to do with the car industry, all right? But the point of this is intrinsically and essentially these processes are the same, right? So too, there are a lot of biological, chemical, physical, industrial, a lot of processes on planet Earth and protocols and the way things organically happen that are basically the same but are not found in the same industries. For example, we did a very short study by a firm called Inno360 on potential markets for non-traditional markets for suborbital. And what one of the findings was, well, people are very interested, the people who make wind turbine blades are very interested in the suborbital research. They don't know it. Well, why would they be interested? Because apparently that little microgravity, the amount of microgravity that you get can actually give you insight on a particular coating they want to put on their wind turbines. So the key is to break down what this market or what this capability offers, and then to understand the primary fundamental processes, and then go out and listen to groups you normally wouldn't listen to and see if they have a need where we have a solution to bring them. And don't think that you know who the customers are.
Okay.
End of story.
Perfect job, Eric. Go.
So when I was working in the space life sciences industry, I went to NIH and I said, we have this incredible opportunity to do some science with NASA. And they said, stop right there. If it involves space, stay at NASA. It doesn't belong in NIH. And we've since seen MOUs and other nice pieces of paperwork signed between the two agencies. And still, there's a bit of a firewall. And NIH says if it applies to life on Earth, put it into our proposal sections. If it ever says the word astronaut, ever says the word space, just keep it over in NASA's house. And in my mind, there's some point in time where clearly those barriers are not here. And if we think about the Space Frontier Foundation, at some point, we are a spacefaring society, and all the things that our agencies do are done on space and in space and on Earth. So where is the transition point? When does space cease to be the domain strictly of NASA, but it also becomes the domain of NOAA and USGS and NIH and the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce and everybody else who interacts as customers for other research organizations. So I think it's interesting to think, that there is a barrier that's going to be falling, and how do we just push it?
Push it. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Let me just ask real quick, Patton, do you have anything to say? You've been real quiet. You've been real quiet.
Well, you learn a lot by listening.
But you're on a panel, so talk.
But I guess one thing one thing I'll throw in is that I do worry we might suffer from over-expectation. And the space station or any orbital research platform, or for that matter, even probably suborbital research platform, is a research platform. And usually we're talking about something that's a very academic interest. That doesn't mean that it doesn't affect the common man at some point. But, when somebody like Pasteur is playing around with the microscope, who was his customer? What was his business plan? you know, today, pasteurization, microbiology, anything that took a microscope to look at had its genesis back then. So, you know, my feeling is that most industries want to do something on a very short time scale compared to space flight, compared to most basic research. Most people I know in the business world, when they're talking about research, they're talking about go in the lab, come back in a month and tell me how I'm going to make a profit shortly on what you're doing. And that doesn't fit very well with anything that goes up in orbit. I mean, it takes usually years just to get on a manifest. I think the biotech industry may be an exception because they have a very long life cycle on their products, and it takes a very long time to get it approved through a drug FDA. But that's not to say that commercial interests shouldn't be interested. I believe they are. I think, you know, taking ground-based research as a comparison, industry is usually very aware of what ground-based researchers are doing in academic labs throughout the country. And I think there's no exception to what goes up in space. I think our industry is quite interested in many of our teams. We've had industrial partners who might not be paying anything, but they're certainly involved just because they want that slight edge of knowing what's happening before their competitors. And so, you know, we have a space station, you know, speaking from my perspective on the material science side, we have a facility up there. We have a number of teams working on various research activities, and most of them have, at least at some level, an industrial partner who's watching over their shoulder, not committing a lot of money or anything like that, but committing time and watching what's going on. Like I said, they just want that little edge over their competition if anything comes out of this research that can be made into a product. And what's disappointing to me is most of these teams are international, and most of the companies that seem to be involved are not American. So, you know, it's one thing that maybe we're falling down the job just asking, would you participate with us? We don't want your money. We just want your expertise. We want your advice. We want your help wherever you can provide it.
Perfect. I want to pull us back to, this is about developing the customer and tie into something that Paul said before about the serendipity of discovery. And what we're talking about is the serendipity of finding a new set of customers. How do we shoot in the dark until we find that new set of customers that is going, I mean, obviously the established customers, the set of customers that we've been targeting don't want to go to the station. I mean, they've had 20 years to make up their minds, and the exit barriers for them to change the way they're doing business and do it a new way haven't come down all that much since then. Our good friend Mark Uran, AAA of the space station program up at headquarters, has been trying to get demand to increase for space station utilization, and he's actually, you know, been doing a lot of work on that. But, you know, the question that I'm starting to assimilate a couple questions that I've received, you know, how do we go out and find new customers? Because the ones we've been going at for the last 20 years, you know, how many times do you knock on the door and they shut it in your face before you start saying, thank you very much, I'll try somewhere else. And we're looking for not necessarily even the black swan of that new customer base. We'll take an ugly gray duckling, you know, and just somebody who shows interest that, you know, pretends to like us. And is it a matter of going out to social sciences? Is it a matter of going out to artistic or cultural? I don't know. I mean, we're talking about orbital science, so I don't want to stick just with physical sciences, material sciences, or biological. So, I mean, how do we, and is that a good use of taxpayers' money to do this kind of buckshot approach? And is there any other way to do it? Dennis, you've got thoughts.
In my humble opinion, investment of government resources in the development of this market could be one of the most important things we've ever done in the space industry. We've already built, as my first chart showed, the great ability to supply this industry. I mean, look at what the space station can do and all the others. And so now it's time to build demand. It seems like it's the logical choice. Charlie Bolden said recently, you know, sometimes it takes the government to crack a nut that industry cannot crack by itself. And it's an appropriate thing for government to do, to build markets. In this case, we're also talking about saving lives and other national, you know, serving other national needs, even global needs. So I think there should be no or very little doubt as to the rationale for NASA and some of these other agencies to play a role.
But tying into what Charles Miller mentioned last time with Thomas Kuhn, you know, we've all within this paradigm. You know, people that have worked in this program, we all bought into this paradigm. We've all grown up in this paradigm. It's hard to look outside the paradigm of who the users might be.
You can't, and if I could just, let me push back on you a little bit, Jeff, okay? You talk about, and I love you dearly, you know that. Biological research, okay, we know who the biomedical companies are. Well, you're assuming that we're going to send human beings out into the solar system always. Now, what if synthetic biology, something gets really, really robust, and what if in order to go to Mars, we use 3D printing and a combination of synthetic biology, and we just send a stream of electrons over there, and they self-assemble down there, and it becomes a Jeff-like creature. You don't need to worry about radiation, okay? But you're assuming to look for a customer base that you do. And I guess my point would be, we don't know who the customers are. We know who the classic customers are, and those customers in interfacing with the opportunity capability we have given them have shaped the infrastructure and the architecture of our space voyaging society. If we have different customers, believe me, as the customers use more and more of the resource, they will shape the capability and the resource. And what we'll have, the architecture we'll have in space will be radically different from that what we have now, if we have radically different customers. And then the next thing I wanted to ask you, my dear colleague.
You're not going to let me respond?
Should I? How many think I should let Jeff respond?
I'll take 30 seconds.
How many don't? All right.
Very good.
Yeah, but
then you can attack.
All right, you can
It's
respond.
probably Gary,
Jeff.
right? Gary's
His boss, yeah.
No, I'll say, well, I'll use the example that I gave was the recent shuttle flight with Amgen involved, and I'm sure that you know, they're testing a pharmaceutical in space, so of course, right, it must have something to do with astronauts, but I'm sure their business is not built upon the idea that they're going to be selling this pharmaceutical, if it works, to astronauts. It's about an Earth-based application, and so, you know, that's what I think the nearer term, and that's what I think about mostly is we need to find customers out there that are interested in using space for Earth-based benefit, because it's going to be a while before we get out there or print Jeff-like creatures on other planets.
Erica had something to say. Oh no, Diane was going to say more?
Well, I just want to say something to you, Dennis, okay? And that is, no, why don't you tell me how it is that a government or even an outside government entity builds demand? How exactly builds demand that customers...
Without just throwing money at the problem?
Yes, without throwing money at the problem. Intellectually, how do you build demand without being in the same mindset of the customers who aren't there yet, whom you don't know exist? How exactly are you proposing to spend taxpayer dollar building demand?
So there's a book recommended by Mark Uran, by the way, that I read called The Diffusion of Innovations.
Who else read that book? 5th edition.
Okay, it's Amazon.com. And then you become an investor in Blue Origin. But anyway, that's beside the point. Take a look at that book. So I think one of the many case studies is the Agricultural Research Service, funded by our friends at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Half of that budget is an agricultural extension service. And what this book talks about is this is a high-touch thing. You got to really sit down peer-to-peer within the same social network and spend a lot of time and let them try it and play with it and learn about it and ask their friends and their, you know, this and that. Anyway, the Agricultural Extension Service has been highly effective in transfusing, you know, the innovations of the research service to the farm, you know, and but
is it never doing that?
So if you follow that paradigm, half of our money would be on R&D and half would be, you know, getting people like this guy to go talk to scientists in his world. So it can be done, and I think it should be done.
But Dennis, the reason why that paradigm works is because the agricultural research, given the fact it has a base of real capable technology and discovery, goes to the customer, and they're able to go to the customer via the extension office because they've listened to the farmers, and they know what the farmer needs. I would like to...
They don't necessarily just do what the farmer asks them to do.
No, but they listen.
And they go to the decision makers. They don't go to the farmers.
Correct. but they listen to what the farmer needs. And I would say that one of the things NASA does not do well, and I don't think it's our fault.
It's our fault. 10-year-old humor joke.
Because we're a hierarchical bureaucracy, and we're a government institution stabilized by social solidarity, and you can't change that. Okay?
Right.
Comma. But one of the things that NASA and government agencies don't do well is they broadcast to the customer on their frequency. They don't go and turn in their receiver to the customer's frequency to understand what the customer needs, wants, and what the customer is. And until we're able to do that, we'll just round up the usual suspects, and we'll get the same result.
May I respond?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Nice.
With a lady,
Without any
seconds
10-year-old humor joke.
to the
yeah.
couch on
Right.
the left. Anyway, anyway, so when we do our elevator pitch, we can remove your gravity, blah, 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 blah. And it's amazing. Some people kind of go, huh? Others go, oh my God, that will solve this problem or this problem or this problem that has been confounding us for years. We don't know, and we will never know their problems. You're absolutely right. But we simply want to inform them about a new tool they can add to their toolkit.
But it sounds like we've been talking to the individual farmers and not going to the decision leaders of the communities, in this case of the scientific communities, and letting them, because they're on the same communication frequency as the individual researchers. We're not, we being NASA or we being the government. So, but we need to get to the decision leaders so that they can diffuse the information down, and that probably hasn't been a targeted activity.
Well, all of these are good methods, and
Right.
we just have to find an optimal mix.
One thing I'd throw out, though, is that it's hard to get the attention of decision makers when it's a small activity. I was talking at the beginning of how the Microgravity Materials Program is back from the dead. It went to zero funding. It's now creeped its way up to a couple million a year. In the grand scheme of the national government, if you want to get somebody's attention with $2 million a year, well, good luck. You're not going to get a high-level individual, and that's true not just within the government, but also in industry and in academia. $2 million just doesn't get split too many ways. And so, there's so many problems you could identify that NASA could do better to serve the industry. Do they put enough money into it themselves? Do they communicate well enough? Could they improve the operations so it doesn't take years to get something done? And, finally, I think something about our selections maybe are overly academic. I think that's something Mark Uran was probably looking at, that perhaps when we select teams to go on space station, we ought to look and say, do these guys seem to have any end goal in mind, or is this just a purely, I hate to use the word academic because it's such a old one, tired one, but that's, I guess, what I'm getting at is if there's no, if it just is nice to do because it's really cool, you really have trouble seeing why we should be spending our time on it.
So this is one of the interesting places where the commercial entrance into this field really does change the game again. Because if we're talking about taxpayer dollars and just NASA, then we really do need to push towards ends that are justified. But when we start to talk about the commercial industry, we can think about a whole nother set of markets. We can talk about things that are just done for fun. And there was a great piece that was done by Larry DeLucas on protein crystal growth, where he found that he could make more money flying his protein crystal grower to do jewelry than he could to do pharmaceutical work. We could get more money out of space shooting porn than we can doing research. And we can think about all sorts of markets that are completely trivial, totally not appropriate for NASA, but a really big moneymaker, and those can drive access for the rest of us as well. So I think that there's a whole ecosystem here that we haven't had the freedom to talk about before. And
I think with the right context, you could turn those activities, or at least portray those activities as science, right? So
potential.
But Erica makes a splendid point, and that is the universe does not, or the solar system, the universe, the galaxy, no longer belongs to NASA. That's the revolution.
It is, and I think it even behooves us in the research industry to think about what are the kinds of things that NASA hasn't been able to do in recent years. We can't fly deadly organisms. We can do salmonella, but we can't get Ebola up there. So if someone has a way to make money from flying Ebola, go to a commercial flight provider. See if they'll work for you.
Think what you could do if you started a boneless chicken ranch on orbit. Think of all, it'd just be all be breast meat, no bones.
Okay, but how, let's look at the real example that is a life sciences example, and that's space tourism. That space tourism, it's happening, and it's about to happen, and there's a large market out there of people who want to spend a lot of money just to ride in space. That is not scientific, but as that occurs, I anticipate, at least in my area of biology, biotech, human factors, human physiology, biomedical research, the more of tourism there is in space, the more demand there's going to be to understand what's happening to my body.
Right.
Am I going to be able to stay healthy for as long as I want to be up there vacationing? Am I going to be okay when I come back? Am I going to have any permanent problems potentially down the road? So, letting the commercial uses of space be done brings along with it, in a very real way, the science and technology development that is really the government's role to do. And also then gives us a great opportunity to start to ask questions about biomedical challenges of spaceflight, not just in a 40-year-old healthy test pilot, but in an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old and someone with chronic diabetes. And we can start to drive a really robust industry behind that, a really robust set of academic research questions as well.
And we're already preparing for that with some research in wearable biomedical instrumentation for the folks that are going up that are willing to share their biomedical data on their flights, creating a database to store all that information, so you do get a wide range of data collected from a wide range, I guess I should say, a lot of data collected from a wide range of participants, not just highly trained, well-conditioned,
And then the dirty secret there, though, is that most tourists are going to go fly once, maybe twice in their lifetime.
Right.
But there is an opportunity for the academic research community, for the industrial research community to say, hey, I have 5 payloads I want to fly. I want to fly them each 10 times. And that's going to be a massive driver in terms of just the resources coming into how we support commercial space.
So taking advantage, I'm trying to answer the question they gave us within the next 22 minutes of how are we going to develop it. So what I've heard you say, Jeff, is, take advantage of the commercial activities that are out there and develop the research themes around the opportunities that are provided by extant commercial markets. If I got that right.
You don't need smart people or even government bureaucrats, I think, to answer at least that question on the top level. It's if it's cheaper, if it's easier to do, if it's faster, if it's less bureaucratic, that's the things that attract.
What if it's worse too? Is that okay? I'm saying, what if you've got it's not 1e minus 6 microgravity, it's 1e minus 4 or 1e minus 3.
Right. Well, I think that's going to be very dependent on the individual investigator, but usually if you wait for the perfect, I've heard the expression perfect's the enemy of the good, and if you wait for the perfect opportunity, you'll wait a long time.
Right.
And so, if some of these commercial activities work out, or some of these commercial providers work out, where access to space is quicker, less bureaucratic, shorter time frames involved, cheaper. Those are the type of things that will cause a market to develop, a market that we don't really have right now.
Yeah, if the science community could really figure out a way to take advantage of low resolution or poor functionality suborbital rides or orbital rides even, and then somehow massage that data into a higher resolution. If you're so smart, come on, figure out a way to do it. That's what we did with, large aperture radar or whatever, multiple dishes, placed, far apart to recompose a higher res image, so using existing, more physically limited technologies.
One of the things that NASA could do, or FAA could do, should FAA choose to engage, is to parse the capabilities offered by lack of gravity or low gravity, explore the scientific and patent literature to understand what actual research is, where the research problems are in these particular disciplines, and then go do a search for those particular research problems, but which is not discipline specific. So then what might happen, and what happened in the small suborbital study that we did, is disciplines that you don't expect have anything to do with space, but have similar physical, chemical, and material problems, all of a sudden become candidates for the capabilities that we offer. But we wouldn't know unless we did that expert literature search to voyage into new communities of practice that we don't know about now.
Sounds like a commercial for Inno 360.
If not them, then
Or
other
whoever,
people.
but no, it's a good point. I mean,
But the paradigm is a
talking
good
about
one.
the white space, you know, attack the white space kind of thing. I did get a new question, but I haven't had a chance to, I'll just read it. Okay, do it, yeah,
Can
yeah,
we
yeah.
just,
talk.
all right, you read that, and then can we just ask over here and over here, maybe 5 or 6 shout outs, what should NASA do about customers? Just
What do you mean, what should they, multiple choice?
No, just what should they do? Give me ideas. Talk.
Spend a lot more than $2 million.
Okay, what
More
else?
money.
What else? Read that, Ken.
Keep rules on ISS easier for entrepreneurs to deal with.
What else?
Invest in more basic research.
What else? Understand what ROI means. There's a thought. We don't do that. What else?
This is basic research.
You read the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
Duplicate the Airmail Act with small experiments.
What does that mean?
Meaning they subsidize the early airmail.
Oh, airmail. I thought you said Airedale.
So you're saying take cruiser orbital.
Dogs in space, okay.
Make an orbital version of cruiser.
And there, middle.
Katya.
You.
I have a really out there idea. So, as an alternative to aerial or cremation, what if you could take loved ones into space and shoot them out into space and have them float off Earth?
That's commercially available. It is.
No, he's saying go, or you're talking about live people though, right? Oh, I thought it was really out there. I was going with the live people.
Can we nominate anyone for that?
Well, you could do it with animals too, you know, little Chloe the cat.
I'll shut up. IP.
Fly real researchers. People have been doing materials research for 30 years. It's a whole different ballgame when a guy's eyes, ears, and nose are there.
I think that's a great idea. The idea was fly actual scientists. I think that's great. That will get people into STEM. Talk about a STEM promoter. That will get people into STEM.
Here's a really crazy idea. Invite artists, poets, writers, non-scientists, non-engineers, fly in space, fly the vomit comets, fly as much as possible, and let them play. And from that activity, new ideas are born. Because astronauts and scientists are so focused on a little teeny tiny project, they barely have a chance to look out the window and enjoy what they're seeing out there, the experience of space. And new ideas come from that.
So I think this democratization of space is actually really important because it also speaks right back to the panel in terms of driving markets. Because when we have a robust commercial industry, we're not just going to be flying commercial or flying career astronauts. We're going to need people who are providing entertainment, who are learning how to cook in microgravity because really the food right now sucks. We need people who are going to be able to do, haircuts and clean, lavatories. And there's a whole set of creature comforts that go along with extending the space frontier.
I'm convinced litter boxes. You got to figure out how to get the litter boxes to work.
And if we're going to truly have the human race settle the space or conduct interstellar voyages and become an interstellar voyaging society, everything that we do on Earth, from haircuts to litter boxes, needs to be done in space. Now, and that's something that the government doesn't necessarily do because by this time, space no longer belongs to the government. Space belongs to humanity.
Let me throw in a question at you. What is the question is the barrier to customers the ability to guarantee routine, reliable access up and down? I would say, what is the barriers that are keeping people, what is keeping all these hordes of artists and cat enthusiasts from running to the cruiser program?
Why would you ever ask us? I mean, if we knew, then we wouldn't have a lack of customers.
So I guess whoever asked that question, I'm sorry, I don't know.
But we can talk about it.
Okay.
But
Money.
of course, it's money.
Perception. Because I had an artist friend who struggled for years to get one thing to fly on the NASA's Vomit Comet, and he had to transform his entire art project into a science project to study the effects of pigments in zero gravity. He couldn't even use the word art
I don't know if everybody heard that. An artist who wanted to fly had to rewrite his proposal, reword it so it was scientific sounding, so it went through the proposal processing to get accepted.
And if we had a Dragon capsule, the artist could just fly.
That's why it's so great that we're poised to have commercial entities independently capable of delivering whatever a paying customer will send into space.
Right.
Artists,
Jacques
poets,
Pepin could cook on Dragon.
biotech, whatever, and then it's no longer owned by the government. That is fantastic.
Okay, Joe, 60 seconds, and I'm going to.
Factor for people going beyond cost, and that is right now you can do it, but you have to have $30 million or so, 6 months.
And you got to learn Russian.
You got to learn Russian.
Right.
And you got to live in Russia.
So there are other barriers, there are other entry barriers, and not just dollars.
You could charge $40 million, and if you eliminate those other barriers, you get customers lined up.
Okay.
Business opportunity for the private sector is to become a facilitator of one-stop shopping for flights on orbital platforms and suborbital.
So does this mean that deaf people can't fly? ADA. What about ADA? U.S. jurisdiction does not exceed a certain altitude. I imagine flight level 600. Okay, does not apply. Okay, so you could fly anybody you want. Question, well, and the question up here is how about handicapped people? And of course, I don't know about of course, but help me.
Well, the experience with Stephen Hawking on zero
flew
G
on
is
zero
great,
G.
and there's a lot of great work going on right now. We had some terrific conversations with the U.S. Paralympic team about how we can get athletes involved in training for suborbital flights. So these barriers are coming down, and there's real research that's needed to ensure that it's safe. But that shouldn't stop us.
So okay.
And I was just going to, this is taking a step back, but as far as people who have not been getting up in orbit very frequently, I think it was an excellent point to fly real scientists to devote their careers to a scientific field or project. One thing that's frustrating about the current situation in our program is that the experiments are extremely scripted, and I think that is a good way to describe it. They perform an experiment, and if it doesn't go according to script, which is often what happens in the lab, and you have to go back and redo it, and 9 times out of 10 when it happens in the lab, you say it's a mistake and I got to correct it. Maybe 1 out of 10 times at the most, it's an unexpected result that's very exciting, and that's often where you get your biggest breakthroughs. Well, in the space program, we do a scripted experiment. If it doesn't go to script, we say, okay, go back to the ground, think about it a couple years, we'll get you back on the manifest and redo it.
Maybe.
And so, you know, if we have a program where people get to space easily, can stay on orbit long periods of time, basically the cost of keeping somebody up there really drops, and we can have plenty of people up there. That's the type of experiments that now go forward at a glacial pace and hopefully could go at a much more rapid pace.
Let me hit a question here because I do have a couple more I want to hit. Number one, by the person who asked the orbital debris question, it's a good question. It's just, I mean, maybe if there's, the question is, you know, maybe, you know, is there anyone working on commercial side of space debris? And the answer is yes. And I was then trying to think, how could I morph this question into a panel question? You know, is there a way to turn orbital debris mitigation into a research project so that it could become a potential customer for orbital science? And the answer is yes.
Prizes.
Yeah, prizes.
So I haven't used the P word, so let me just throw that in here. And that is that we can use prizes as ways to spur things that we want to see happen.
Absolutely.
We can put out big carrots and say, come and do our bidding, right? Come and try to attack the problems that we care most about. This is a way of creating markets.
And the non-traditional entrants will surprise you. Absolutely. Another question was, has NASA ever significantly changed the way it does business in response to customer needs? And I'm sorry, I'm speaking very quickly. And the answer, I would say, and the NASA folks can answer, I would say in my experience, NASA obviously is limited by the FARs. It's limited by, you know, its authorization of how it can act. But I think it's been very, very flexible in how it deals with different customer, you know, well, a couple of things. The way it's dealt with different markets in terms of Space Act and, you know, the way they're moving forward there. But specifically, what I thought about this was, Bob Bigelow is putting up orbital, you know, platforms, and he's referred to the space station as a Hyatt hotel. So here's a guy who's putting up a platform to basically provide, at the very limit, the same, you know, fulfill the same job as the space station is fulfilling. But it's not gonna be the Hyatt hotel. So it seems like NASA, listening to the customer, ended up adding on a lot of bells and whistles in the name of technical performance, high requirements, when Bob Bigelow seems to think you don't need all that stuff. Panel? Who's crazy?
Oh, you don't need all that stuff. John Glenn didn't have all that stuff. You know, the Apollo astronauts didn't have all that stuff. They were there for a while. So I think Bigelow's right. You put something up there, and people, build your Motel 6, and people will come and stay for a while and go home. And the more that do it, the more we learn. And as a researcher, that's what fascinates me. And I'm really excited about the prospect of having more people in space and more questions to answer. So I think there's a partnership there between the government and industry, and we can't stop it. NASA's got to get out of the way and facilitate and prime the pump, and don't get in the way and try to regulate or control or force it. Let it happen and be a part of all this, not some kind of bureaucratic agency.
Hear, hear. And saying that, you'll notice that a lot of folks at NASA today have been on the panel, and they've been very supportive of commercial space, which is really good. NASA's not a monolith. There's a lot of different voices within NASA, but there is a large and growing contingent within NASA that express sentiments similar to Jeff and Patton and Diana and Dennis and others, Charles and everybody else. End of soapbox. Question? You guys, okay, I've got other questions. And I was going to go back to the point that Dennis was talking about, where communication is, the diffusion of innovation concepts, where communication, getting the message to the right people is very important, and the way you deliver the message is very important. Academia tends to have slides, not this one, but a lot of little words on a thing. I saw an asteroid or a NEO presentation the other night. It was basically taking paragraphs from a paper and putting it on a presentation chart. And the average retention of a PowerPoint presentation by the audience is 5%. 1/20th of the material is what you end up remembering. And so I think we need to change the way we provide the message. We need to make it a better story. Storytelling was referred to before, because even though it simplifies the message, it increases the how memorable the message is. So I think that will help. I love the 10-20-30 rule, 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point font.
But Ken, we just need to do as well.
We need to do as well.
So I think we are caught up, we've had an excuse to be caught up for a while in a PowerPoint culture where we did more slides than we did hardware. And we've talked more about flying people than we flew people. So Virgin Galactic now has almost as many reservations as NASA and the Russians and the Chinese have flown people ever in the history of humanity. So I think as we start to do, then we can start to have better stories and let people tell their own stories. I mean, yes, artists and journalists and kids and people who have voices that are different than the ones in this room.
And like it or not, I don't know how you feel about Oprah Winfrey, but when Anusha Ansari went on Oprah and told her story of her flight to station, that's what you need more of, because then the American public and the worldwide public is going to pay attention, I think, a little bit more. Okay, no comments? We've got 5 minutes here, so I'll vamp, not a problem. Okay, so let me get kind of deep into it. The science community will want to do things on orbit, and at some point, the national defense interests are going to conflict with what the commercial sector wants to do. And the two set of interests tend not to be aligned very well. They tend to be 180 degrees apart, and you've got a lot of examples of that. The most recent is ITAR. GPS is a good example of it. It goes down to the origins, the genesis of Arianespace is due to U.S. National defense policy that was upheld. It denied the French the ability to buy a flight on a NASA rocket, so they decided to build their own rockets and start flying. So is that something, is it premature to talk about that, or if I want to go up there and start taking pictures of, of the Earth in the name of science, and now all of a sudden, I get a knock on the door, is this a point of contention that's going to be exacerbated, or?
Well, I haven't heard of anyone coming after a scientist yet, but I could see it. When the microgravity program got shut down, I got to do other things within NASA, and at least once or twice I had to run across ITAR issues, and I'm just astounded personally that it's on the books, because it is so ambiguous that you could come after anybody for most any reason if you wanted to. It's just, I don't think it, I just, like I said, I just can't see how we could have passed a law like that, because there's no technical or scientific publication that couldn't theoretically be tied to ITAR in some way. It's a joke.
You're against ITAR. Well, not you're.
No, I certainly don't want true national secrets to get out, but this is basically saying anything that might in any way be used for any purpose that could be used against the United States. Well, a stick could be used against the United States. I mean, it's just an absurd law.
Yeah, okay.
I think that there's a serious potential for stress and tension on that subject. If you recall, about 2 weeks ago, there was a photographer who took a picture of a policeman writing a ticket in a U.S. city on the ground on terra firma, and he was told by the policeman that he could not do that it was illegal to take a picture of a policeman giving a ticket in a public square, and it went to court, and in fact, he was right, he could take the picture. If it happens on terra firma, in that small a dimension, surely it is not unlikely that it will happen out in the solar system. I think one of the things that we do on the ground, and I'm not advocating it, but it's one of the things that we do when we have conflicts between military on the ground and populations, is we put the military on bases and we contain them on bases. Now, the analog to that would be to contain certain sectors of space, the military in certain sectors of space. That is their analog for a base.
Perfect.
I should add that in much of commercial research, like biotech, there is no ITAR. It's a very international community. And so when we consider steps to develop markets for our rockets and our platforms, our space station, we really need to work with our international colleagues in this. A rising tide will float all boats, and the market is very international. So, and when we create pharmaceuticals that save lives, they'll be saving lives everywhere.
Good. These will be the wrap-up comments, so thank you, Dennis.
Group of students at MIT designing a free-flyer biosatellite were told that if we weren't careful about how we were designing our targeted reentry vehicle, it might be taken for something else. It's a missile. So I think that there are a lot of blurry lines that we're going to be running into in different ways.
Well, my wrap-up comment is about a little bit off that topic, but I'm a researcher, but I want to say that, on the one hand, the government sponsors research, and that's a great place for the government to be, and that's traditionally what NASA's done, is research. And what we're really not good at is the other side, which the gentleman over here said, return on investment. Commercial work that is for a return on investment is not necessarily research, and it doesn't have to be published, and it gives the company a competitive advantage, and they don't necessarily want to share that. The government's not good at that, hasn't been good at that, but at this moment in time, we're finally at a point where commercial entities can deliver those payloads to a microgravity environment, and they are free to pursue commercial work for commercial sake. I think, though, that to succeed at that well, NASA can help and should be and can do that, and I hope will.
Patton?
I think that was well said.
Okay. I know there's still people who want to talk out in the audience, but we're running out of time. I want to let you go. I really, really appreciate your participation and having fun with us. And so thank the audience, or thank the panelists with me, and thank you, audience. And we're going to have some comments here. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, everyone. We're going to go straight into the next talk, which is a talk by the Inspector General of NASA about his paper called NASA's Challenges Certifying and Acquiring Commercial Crew Transportation Services, which is a long